What's up guys, Vince Blaze here with Adventures Within Media. Today's a special day because we are back at it again with another review. Check out the new studio setup. Tory and I had fun just playing around with a couple of setups here and there. Some new tube lights that we just acquired. So I'm pretty excited about it and it's looking pretty good so far. But today we're not here to talk about the studio. Maybe I'll give you guys a studio, I guess, walkthrough, which is basically just this room. So here's your studio walkthrough. But maybe I'll make a full video at some point. Today we're going to be talking about the Canon R6 Mk Ii because we recently acquired this camera, and thus far, overall, I think it's been an amazing camera. Now, this is not going to be a technical review. It's not going to be a crazy review. It's just basically my honest opinion after having used it in a couple of different scenarios. So, the R6 Mk II. Obviously, you guys can look up the specs, but I think the one thing that got my attention the most when it came to purchasing this camera was 4K 60 10-bit. Since the last 5 years, I've been shooting on the EOS R. I've been shooting on this camera, on this body for, like I said, 5 years. I had 2 of these. I recently just sold one, and I'm probably going to be selling this one as well. For what I'm doing, I wouldn't say that's necessarily not good enough. For photos, this is still an excellent camera. If you guys want to check out the review, we have one on this channel. I'll link it down below. But this is still an amazing camera. If you're a photographer, this is still a great camera. There's lots of great features. It's still, I would say, professional. You can still get great quality work. And especially for YouTube, as I mentioned in the review, there's a lot of things that you can do with this. So I wouldn't necessarily not consider this camera if you're considering a beginner camera or semi-professional camera to start your video /YouTube /photography business. This is still a great camera. I wanted to have a little more professional features, and the main one was to have access to 4K. The EOS R does have 4K, but it's only at 23 or 30 frames per second, which limited me a little bit when it came to slow motion and just providing more flexibility in post, because 4K usually allows me to crop in a little bit more, especially if I'm delivering HD or for social media content. Using this camera, I've so far shot a lot of social media content, as you'll see on the screen right now. So Tory, my intern, and I went out to the Tory Square here in Winnipeg, and we decided to just experiment, obviously testing out the camera as soon as I got it. We shot some social media content, we shot some photos. We've also had the opportunity to use it on a professional shoot. So we used it for a client's live conference. We recorded that entire process. And so things like, for example, not having a record limit came in really handy. One other reason why I decided to hop onto this camera, a lot of the mirrorless /DSLR cameras that Canon currently has in its lineup, unfortunately have a record limit. And so when it came to podcasts, when it came to live recording, it was extremely limiting for me. And it's just one more thing to have to worry about. I also was able to take this camera hiking, shoot little promos videos, shoot little travel videos. Overall, within the last month that I've had this camera, I've had a lot of experience using it through and through. Some of the highlights of this camera, obviously, like I said, 4K 10-bit 60 frames per second. The EOS R unfortunately only shoots at 8-bit unless you record externally, which I only really tested once just because the hassle of having a monitor, etc., blah, 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 wasn't really appealing to me most of the time. So that bit depth made it very difficult, and actually I didn't really use Canon log or C log when shooting that camera. I would just shoot in the native neutral profile because there wasn't enough bit depth recognition for the colors for me to be able to properly color. This also comes with 2 SD card slots. Now the EOS R only has one. I've only ever shot with one SD card slot. I've never really had any issues. Obviously, it's great if you're shooting a wedding and you want to have redundant backing up. Honestly, even shooting with it, I haven't even looked at that feature yet because it's just never been a concern of mine. Like I mentioned, during a wedding, it's good to have a backup. In other scenarios, you might want to have a backup as well. But I think that Canon and the SD cards that I use are fairly high quality. And so I've never really had those issues of having a corrupted SD card or losing an SD card, etc. Some of the things that if you want to compare to the EOS R are obviously the body is very similar. It's still the Canon ecosystem, but some things are a little bit different. You have a little bit more of a professional look on this camera, or professional tools, or a professional feel to this camera. But one of the first things you'll notice is obviously we have a joystick. This joystick comes in handy. It is very easy to use. I did get used to the touch bar on the EOS R, which I enjoyed. it's very nice to have such a tactile feel when navigating through, say, for your menu or your focus points, etc, etc. One thing I really like, and I didn't realize how much I liked / missed this, is the wheel. This scrolling wheel is very useful because usually I'm using it for either aperture or ISO when shooting, so it's very useful. When scrolling through photos, it's also very useful. The EOS R only has like the square where you tap on it, so it's sort of frustrating. It's not as easy to navigate through your photos compared to when you have access to this wheel. Tory also mentioned he had noticed that the top menu right here is different. On the EOS R, everything through digital, so it's a digital menu. It's not as tactile. So say for example, you want to prepare yourself for a shot without turning on the camera. You can't do that on the EOS R. You actually have to turn on the camera first and then change the modes. On the EOS R6, you can obviously just prepare yourself, turn it here and there. Another thing that's amazing is you no longer have to go through mode and info in order to change from video to photo. On the R6, there's actually a switch for video and photo, which is amazing. I've gotten so used to the mode info to the EOS R that it was actually quite quick, and I'm actually much quicker at it than I am from flicking to this, because I have to think for one more second. Oh yeah, I have to flick here. But I think overall it's probably a lot faster and a lot more seamless when you have this option here. Tory and I actually use this camera to shoot a lot of social media content for Instagram Reels, just testing it out. And so if you guys want to see some of those reels and some of that content, that raw footage, then feel free to check us out on Instagram. You guys can follow us there too, because we're going to be posting a lot more often. Let's talk about the body. The body is very similar to the EOS R or pretty much any other Canon DSLR / mirrorless camera. One thing I did notice that sort of scared me at first was that obviously this has IBIS, and so the sensor actually moves and you can actually hear it, which is a little bit off-putting. Actually, the first time I got this camera, I ordered it, it wasn't working, and I had a feeling it was because it got shooken too hard, because it said there was like a sensor issue, etc. I had to return it and then it came back, etc, etc. The EOS R does not have IBIS, and the only thing that's moving in there is just the springs and the battery pack. It has nothing to do with the actual sensor. But if you are familiar with the Canon system and the Canon cameras, everything else is fairly the same, and even those tweaks you'll feel at home right away. It won't be difficult to adjust to them. So another thing with these cameras is that Canon has recently, with their R5 series, they had launched these new batteries. Supposedly they're supposed to hold more power, and the newer cameras are supposed to be able to pull more battery power from these batteries compared to the old ones. They're the same size, they use the same charger. I think you can use them in both scenarios. I haven't tested that because I don't want to ruin the cameras. For the most part, the EOS R5, the R6 Mark II, for example, are able to normally pull out more power out of these batteries. I will say one thing that I'm really shocked is probably because I'm shooting 4K, 60, etc. I'm shooting at 4K most of the time. This camera drains a lot more battery than my EOS R. Obviously, this one has a battery pack, but even the one that didn't, that I previously had, would last a lot longer. I'd say like an hour, if not 2 hours longer than this camera does. This camera, I have to switch out the battery, I'd say every 2.5 hours if I'm shooting quite consistently with it, which, you know, not necessarily a big concern if you have 4 batteries like I do, but this camera does utilize a lot more battery power than, say, a camera like the EOS R or my previous Canon 80. As I mentioned, we shot a live event for a keynote speaker at an event here in Winnipeg, and this came in really clutch because, again, there's no record limit, which is amazing. We don't have to worry about having multiple clips. Syncing it in post is a lot less of a hassle, and overall, I think that it's a great feature to have in a video camera. Now, this camera is also a hybrid camera. Most of the DSLR mirrorless cameras from Canon, I'd say, are primarily photo focused and are adapted to also be able to provide you with some high quality video. But we did test this camera out for photo, as this is one of the reasons why I purchased it. I am a hybrid shooter. I do shoot often video and photo, and this has a 24-point-something megapixel sensor, which is more than enough for most of what you need unless you're doing big prints. And I tested it, and again, very seamless experience. I think I actually enjoyed it a lot more than my EOS R when it came to shooting. Just overall felt like I had a lot more frames per second. Electronic shutter without any sound was amazing. It came in clutch. and just overall I think I really enjoyed it. While we were at the True Square testing out the EOS R6, Tory's teacher advisor Sarah actually came out just to see what we were doing, get a little bit of BTS, and just have a feel for how Tory was progressing, and we were able to borrow her and shoot a couple of test portraits with her. Again, seamless experience. I would say if you're purchasing this just as a photo camera, I don't think you'll be disappointed. I'd say it's a little bit overkill because you could get something like the EOS R, which performs just as well and has a higher megapixel sensor. But overall, I really enjoy taking photos with this camera. Now, besides the sensor moving, which could potentially not be an issue, there are two things that sort of stood out to me in the camera. One of the things that took me off guard with this camera is that it has this feature of standby low res. From what I understand, is mainly used when you have an external monitor so that the camera doesn't overheat, but it actually also applies to the monitor on camera. And so I had activated it without sort of realizing it. I think it asks you when you first use the camera, and I had said yes. I turned it on, and what ends up happening is that this camera's LCD will start showing grain when you just have it on standby and you're just looking at the screen. After about 5 to 10 seconds, the grain will get really heavy. And I'd be shooting there within True Square, and I was like, what's going on? What's going on? Super grainy. And as soon as you press record, the grain goes away. And so I think that's just something you have to get used to, and you have to really know your camera, because I'm used to just framing my camera and my shots and looking at the LCD and then pressing record. And then before that, if there's too much grain, then I would then adjust it. But I'd be looking at it and we'd be shooting at about 800 to 1000 ISO, which is fairly high, but not high enough that it should have that much grain. But I think, again, like I said, when I press record, all the grain on the screen would just go away, and it's just thanks to that feature. And I think it's trying to save power from the camera and not overheat the camera as well, which I guess is a great feature, just something I have to get used to. Another thing that sort of disappointed me, which I knew before getting, but it didn't really sink in, was that this camera only shoots IPB. On the EOS R, you can shoot all intra, which from my understanding is a better codec and it has more information. It's less compressed. And so obviously this being a video camera, it's a little bit unfortunate that it only shoots IPB. That being said, I haven't really noticed any reduction in quality or my ability to manipulate the colors. I wouldn't say that that's something that should detract you from wanting to get this camera. And if you are mainly a videographer, it might be something you should consider when making this purchase. Now, after buying this about 2 days ago, I recently saw a YouTube short, which was about the EOS R8. The gentleman was comparing the R6 Mark II and the EOS R8, as basically the R8 would be the same thing. It just doesn't shoot 6K raw downsample to 4K. I'd say that the R8 has the same sensor and pretty much a lot of the same features, maybe not the exact layout, but it is about $1,000 less than this camera. So if you are looking for 4K but don't necessarily need 6K downsampled or raw features, etc., that this camera does have, then maybe the R8 might be a good option for you to look into. Honestly, when I saw that video, I sort of thought to myself, why did I get this camera? But I think there's a few features that this camera still has that I think make it a little bit more professional for the type of things that I'm going to be using it for, but just something that you might want to look into again before purchasing the R6 Mark II. All right. So that's everything. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully this provided you guys with a little bit of insight in the camera and my personal experience using it. Again, I think this is a solid option for any videographer, hybrid photographer, shooter, even just as a main body. I'm using it mainly as a B cam currently, as I also recently acquired the R5, but I also think that this is a really powerful camera for videography, as I said. I would highly recommend you guys consider this camera. That being said, that's everything for me today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys liked the video, obviously drop a thumbs up. Any recommendations or any comments about the camera, something I might have missed during this review, feel free to drop a comment. Quite a few things that are coming on the channel, so stay tuned for that. You guys can always subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Hope you guys enjoyed the review, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Okay, whatever, that's fine. What did I like about the camera? Yeah, the dial, a lot easier to use than green on the, whatever that one's called. The joystick, of course.
This.
What?
It's messy. The first time I'm the one who's fixing your hair.
I don't know what to say about the camera. The mode we are, I hate, way easier to use, a little bit too complicated for me, so, and all of that, it's always just a little that not prompts and buttons feel on the camera.